Thank you very much. I have a few slides which are mainly notes to myself, so I'll speak from here. I am mostly really interested in what the EU can do or not do, not just in the Balkans, but generally, but this is the Balkans being an example. I think many times we talk about previously Ukraine, now Balkans, on the assumption that the EU has just to want and then be able to do something positively or negatively. So there is a blame and responsibility around. And I think that's basically exaggerated, and this is how I'm going to structure this talk of mine. I see the involvement of EU in the Balkans, instability and change, I take Žarko's point, as basically a failure. And I just want to say that why this failure is not really so surprising. Okay, so what are the issues? Or what is the current state of the play in the Balkans? The positive thing is that there is a shrinking geography of animosity, in the sense that we are really now down to flashes of security problems in Bosnia and in Kosovo. That doesn't mean that tomorrow's situation may not change, but basically this is now relatively normalized, as Vesna said, state of affairs. We're also witnessing, partly this is what Žarko meant, withering away of the Western Balkans. This really was a designation of the above stated geography of animosity, basically. Basically, this region was defined by the security problems that connected them. Again, mostly in Kosovo and Bosnia. The fundamental problem, however, for the region is that there is a very slow change. All the fundamental issues are essentially there for a very long time and are yet to be resolved. I'll talk about it a little bit more. Also, these are depressed, uncompetitive, and unbalanced economies. I'll make this case later. But if you look at basic data of the Balkans, you can see that not just in this crisis, but in the last 20 to 30 years, it hasn't been they haven't actually had a very good time. And of course, there is a worsening social situation because of the current protracted crisis, which seems to be hitting the Balkans probably the worst or among the worst all over in the world as a whole. So that's where we are. Okay. So this is just a background information about the GDP per capita in this region. What you can see here, I don't want to spend too much time. On top, you have Slovenia and Greece. This is from 1952 until 2010. And you can see that they have, until this crisis, had relatively positive development. You see the same problem in Slovenia as in other countries below, which have, by and large, not succeeded all that to do much better than late 1970s. So somewhere from 1978, 1979, the things start to go flat, then there is a big dip, and then there is some recovery, and now we are back to the crisis or to the decline. The worst here, this cannot be seen because it stops at 2010, but if you extend 3 more years, then Croatia basically goes back to where it was 30 years ago or more. 1979 was probably the best year. So this is the differentiation. You see that the Bulgaria is doing better. So it has done actually quite better until 2000 or so, 97 actually. And you do see also Albania and Romania doing a bit better. But former Yugoslavia countries are not really doing all that well. Now, let me talk about stability in various ways and what the EU can do. And possibly I would more like to learn about EU than about the Balkans, because I think we all know. By the way, I will also talk about it. So, territorial stability, the question that is paramount because of Ukraine also now. Basically, I'm always puzzled by people taking a geopolitical stance when they talk about EU. But EU essentially offers market integration. I think Žarko was ironically right. Basically, what EU is about is for you to have a cheaper telephone call. I mean, it's a market integration exercise. It's not a state. It's not. So it may actually, integration may prove, and we saw that in the Balkans over a protracted period of time, and it's still the case in Bosnia, may prove inferior to control or extension of territory. So the idea that you offer EU integration, then everybody is happy not to invade or not to protect or not to take over territory is not really something that makes sense, because the EU basically does not offer security in that sense. It offers market integration. And if it is more, if that market integration is preferable to territorial extension, then it works, which means that sometimes, as in the Balkans, you have to wait for everybody to be exhausted or to actually face the constraints and then turn around, which is essentially what has happened in Serbia, let's say a year or a year and a half ago. If you want to think about Ukraine, you have to ask yourself which constraints Putin needs to face. Where are the constraints? And the EU certainly doesn't provide them. Political stability. EU doesn't tend to be good at democratization. It is good at stabilizing a democracy. So what we see in the Balkans also is on one hand, and also if you compare to new member states and then go back further to the east, if a country does not start this whole process of post-socialist transition in a democratic way, through democratic legitimacy, it is not going to be pushed into that by the EU. Once it is a democratic country, once it democratizes, it actually, or once it is in the EU or is close on the way to EU, then you really do get democratic stability in the sense that you don't get too much of extremism. I have here extreme left and right parties in the new member states, in the Balkans, in some EU countries and so on. And you can see here that in the Balkans now, these are last two elections, extreme right and left-wing parties have not been very present, really. And you find them still, obviously, in Czech Republic, the left side, and Greece is becoming a rather polarized country. And the right extremism is actually more prominent in old EU than in new EU countries. But what you see is that once you have a democracy, it turns to be very costly to become an authoritarian or implement extreme policies, because usually what it means is a set of protectionist measures which take you out of the EU. So that may tend to be costly. Economic stability. What you see is that EU can be an instrument for development. It's a market integration. It opens up a lot of new possibilities. But success is actually conditional on domestic economic policies. It is clearly, it clearly depends on whether you have your exchange rate set at a good at an equilibrium, kept there, whether you have a monetary policy, if you still have a monetary policy, or fiscal policy, or labor market policies, and so on. Otherwise, EU can actually be not just destabilizing, it can create a lot of disequilibria. The Balkans are actually the case where you have a lot of disequilibria on internal markets and in external relationships. So it's not, even if you are a member of the EU, even if you are Slovenia, even if you are Greece. So the EU doesn't actually give you economic stability except if you have good domestic economic policies. Social stability. Well, what you have as a so-called EU model of growth, which is when you join the EU, you basically expect that the growth will be spurred by foreign inflows of investment and other types of growth-enhancing things, technology and stuff like that. That type of a growth model often goes together with depressed labor markets and thus brings high social costs. If you look at the Balkans, members, non-members, you now have unemployment rates anywhere between 10 to 30%, and up to 50% when it comes to the young, to the youth. So the EU is not necessarily the best machine for job creation, for a variety of reasons. So to conclude, basically, EU can stabilize once you have made the decisions right in whether you are happy with your territorial, where you want to grab a little bit more, whether you are, whether you know what economic policy you want to pursue, when you have actually decided that you really want to have a democratic system. It doesn't necessarily come just because EU is around. And when you have actually decided that maybe you do want to have social and labor policies which are, let's say, if not towards full employment, then at least not much further from that, then of course EU actually will help you. Thank you very much.